Nobody could remember the exact day everything changed. Some said it started with the endless war, others blamed years of economic isolation. But for ordinary people, the first real sign wasn't politics, it was the gas stations. At first, nobody panicked. Drivers simply noticed longer lines. Then they noticed empty pumps. The television assured everyone that supplies were stable. Officials repeated the same sentence every evening: there is no fuel shortage. Yet every morning the queues became longer. Hundreds of cars waited for hours. Some people slept inside their vehicles just to keep their place in line. Alexei lived in a small industrial town nearly 2,000 kilometers from Moscow. His family had always depended on their old diesel van. Without it, he couldn't deliver vegetables from nearby villages to the local market. Without deliveries, there was no income. One Monday morning, he woke before sunrise. The fuel gauge flashed red. Only 7 liters remained. He drove toward the only gas station still operating. The line stretched nearly 3 kilometers. Nobody complained anymore. People simply waited. Some drank tea, others slept. The atmosphere felt strangely quiet, almost peaceful, like everyone already knew what was coming. 6 hours later, a police car arrived. A loudspeaker crackled. Fuel delivery has been delayed. Groans spread through the crowd. Nobody moved. They continued waiting. At sunset, a tanker finally appeared. People applauded. The station manager stepped outside. We only received enough for 100 cars. There were nearly 800 waiting. Arguments erupted immediately. Some tried to cut the line, others blocked them. By midnight, soldiers arrived. They organized the queue. Nobody smiled. Alexei reached the pump at 3 in the morning. The worker looked exhausted. 20 liters maximum. Alexei paid. The pump stopped automatically. 20 liters, enough for only a few days. Driving home through empty roads, he noticed something strange. Every station outside town was already closed. Their signs were dark, their pumps were covered. Within a week, neighboring villages reported the same problem. No deliveries, no fuel. Farmers began storing diesel like gold. Food prices climbed every day. The government announced temporary transportation adjustments. Official television insisted everything remained under control, but reality looked different. Ambulances sometimes waited hours before finding enough fuel. Bus routes disappeared one after another. Taxi drivers parked their cars permanently. Some began riding bicycles, others walked 20 kilometers to work. Social media filled with photographs, empty stations, closed highways, military convoys moving east. Soon another rumor spread. Fuel shipments still reached Moscow, St. Petersburg too, but the regions, almost nothing. Nobody knew whether it was true. Nobody trusted official statements anymore. People trusted only what they saw, and what they saw frightened them. One evening, Alexei's neighbor knocked on his door. "I have a cousin in Moscow." "So?" "He says every station there still has gasoline." Alexei remained silent. The neighbor continued. "They're protecting the capital." The room grew quiet. Neither man knew whether to believe it. Outside, another siren echoed through town. This time, it wasn't an ambulance. It was the local administration announcing new fuel restrictions. Private purchases would soon require permits. Alexei looked at his nearly empty tank. For the first time in his life, he wondered whether driving had become a luxury. He had no idea that this was only the beginning. Far away, in government buildings few citizens would ever see, officials were preparing another announcement, one that would change millions of lives forever. Alternative fiction story. 3 days after the fuel permits were introduced, life in Alexei's town changed almost overnight. The streets that had once echoed with trucks and buses became strangely silent. Parking lots were full, roads were empty. Only emergency vehicles and military convoys still moved regularly. People stood outside apartment buildings watching the occasional truck pass as if it were something extraordinary. For years, nobody had imagined that movement itself could become a privilege. Now, every kilometer mattered. The local government announced a new rule. Private vehicles could only buy fuel once every 2 weeks. The limit was 15 liters. Many stations never even opened. Some received deliveries, most did not. Nobody knew why. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some claimed pipelines had been damaged. Others believed fuel was being redirected elsewhere. Some whispered that strategic reserves were running low. Nobody could prove anything. Every conversation ended with the same sentence: "I don't know anymore." Alexei's vegetable business collapsed within a week. Farmers could no longer afford to transport their harvest. Several simply left potatoes and carrots in the fields. Others slaughtered livestock because feed deliveries had stopped. The markets looked different now. Shelves weren't completely empty, but every day there was less. Milk became difficult to find. Fresh fruit disappeared almost entirely. Cooking oil doubled in price, then tripled. People began buying anything they could, not because they needed it, because tomorrow it might be gone. The railway station became crowded. Thousands hoped trains would replace cars. Instead, many routes were cancelled. Officials explained that diesel shortages affected locomotives as well. Passengers slept on station floors. Some waited 2 days, others never left. Alexei called his younger sister Elena. She lived nearly 1,500 kilometers away. Normally the drive between them took 2 days. Now it seemed impossible. "I wanted to visit," she said quietly. "I don't think I can anymore." "Are things bad there too?" She laughed, not because anything was funny, because she didn't know what else to do. The buses stopped yesterday. A long silence followed. Finally she asked, "Do you think this will end soon?" Alexei looked out the window. Another gas station across the street had removed its prices completely. The electronic sign was black. "I hope so." He wasn't sure whether he believed his own words. Meanwhile, people adapted. Bicycles sold out everywhere. Old Soviet bicycles were repaired after decades in garages. Horse carts appeared on village roads. Some families began walking 10 kilometers to work every morning. Children no longer complained. Adults no longer expected normal life. One evening, Alexei met an elderly mechanic named Victor. For 40 years, Victor had repaired engines. Now nobody brought cars. They asked him to repair bicycles, or generators, or wood-burning stoves. Victor wiped grease from his hands. "You know what surprises me?" "What?" "It isn't the shortage. It's how quickly everyone accepted it." Alexei didn't answer, because he had noticed the same thing. At first people protested, then they argued. Now they simply adjusted, as if survival had become another daily routine. News broadcasts continued every evening. The presenters smiled. Factories were shown working. Officials visited fuel depots. Everything looked organized. Everything looked calm. Yet outside television screens, reality felt completely different. People trusted neighbors more than headlines. Local chat groups became the real news. Someone reported fuel arriving. Hundreds rushed there. Usually it was already gone. Sometimes the information had never been true. Scammers appeared. They offered gasoline at impossible prices. Some disappeared after taking payment. Others sold watered-down fuel that ruined engines. Nobody knew whom to trust. One cold morning, Alexei walked to the edge of town. From a hill overlooking the highway, he remembered how busy this road had once been. Thousands of trucks every day. Now, nothing. 5 minutes passed. 10. Finally, a single military convoy appeared on the horizon. 20 fuel trucks, escorted by armored vehicles. They never slowed down. They drove straight past the town, south. Alexei watched until they disappeared. An old man standing nearby quietly muttered, "So there is still fuel." Neither of them spoke again. That evening, another announcement appeared on television. The government described it as a temporary transportation optimization plan. Citizens were encouraged to avoid unnecessary travel. Interregional movement would soon require additional documentation in several areas. Officials insisted these measures were designed only to improve logistics. Most people didn't know what to think. Some ignored it. Others quietly packed bags, not because they had somewhere to go, because they feared that soon they might not be able to go anywhere at all. Alexei stood on his apartment balcony, looking at the dark highway stretching toward the horizon. For the first time in his life, the country felt unimaginably large and impossibly far away. Alternative fiction story. The first rumors arrived before the official announcements. Someone's cousin claimed that police checkpoints had appeared on the highways leading out of several regions. A truck driver posted a blurry photograph of a long line of vehicles stopped at a checkpoint. Within hours, the image had spread across thousands of phones. Nobody knew whether it was real. Nobody knew whether it was old. But people believed it anyway. In uncertain times, rumors always traveled faster than the truth. Alexei had almost stopped using his van. Only 9 liters of diesel remained. He parked it beneath an old tree behind his apartment building. The tires slowly lost air. Dust covered the windshield. It looked abandoned. Just months earlier, it had been his livelihood. Now it was something to protect. His neighbor suggested siphoning the fuel and hiding it indoors. Someone will steal it eventually, he warned. Alexei shook his head. If they need it that badly... He never finished the sentence. Life became smaller. People stopped talking about vacations. Nobody planned long trips anymore. The conversations changed. Where can I find flour? Does anyone have medicine? Has the bakery reopened? Simple questions had become the most important ones. The internet still worked, but connections became slower every week. Some news websites disappeared. Others became difficult to access. Local community groups filled with speculation. Every hour someone posted a new rumor. The trains are stopping, the highways are closing, the borders will be restricted. Most of the claims contradicted one another, yet every rumor left people a little more anxious than before. One afternoon, Alexei visited the central market. Half the stalls were empty. The farmers who remained accepted cash, but many preferred barter. A bag of potatoes for batteries, cooking oil for soap. Diesel was worth more than almost anything else. An elderly woman quietly asked whether anyone would exchange 10 liters of fuel for a gold wedding ring. Nobody answered. That evening, Alexei received a call from Elena. She sounded frightened. There are more checkpoints here now. What kind? They're checking documents. For everyone? I don't know. People are saying different things. Alexei leaned back in his chair. Outside, the city lights flickered as electricity briefly failed before returning. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Elena whispered, "If travel becomes impossible, promise you'll call every day. I promise." The next morning, the local administration held a public meeting in the town square. An official stood behind a microphone. He spoke calmly. He encouraged everyone to remain patient. He explained that temporary transportation measures were intended to improve distribution and public safety. He did not answer questions about fuel deliveries. He did not explain why grocery shipments had become irregular. When the meeting ended, people walked away quietly. No shouting, no applause, only uncertainty. As autumn turned colder, bicycles became less common. People walked instead. Factories reduced their working hours. Schools shortened their schedules to save heating costs. Restaurants closed one after another. Taxi signs disappeared from the streets. The town had not stopped living, but it had slowed to a pace nobody had imagined possible. One evening Victor, the old mechanic, invited Alexei into his workshop. The room smelled of oil and rust. On the wall hung faded photographs of trucks he had repaired decades earlier. "They always told us machines keep a country moving," Victor said. Alexei nodded. "And when the machines stop," he looked toward the silent road outside. "People realize how much they depended on them." The workshop fell silent. Only the ticking of an old clock could be heard. Later that night, Alexei climbed the hill overlooking the highway once again. A cold wind swept across the empty pavement. For nearly 20 minutes, nothing passed. Then, in the distance, headlights appeared. Not dozens, not hundreds, just one lonely truck moving through the darkness. It disappeared over the horizon as quickly as it had come. Alexei stood there long after the lights were gone. The silence felt heavier than ever. He wondered what tomorrow's announcement would bring, and whether anyone still believed that tomorrow would look like yesterday. Alternative fiction story. Winter arrived earlier than anyone expected. The first snow covered the empty highways in silence. Without the usual traffic, the roads remained wide for hours after every snowfall. Tire tracks became rare. The roar of engines, once constant, had been replaced by the sound of wind moving through abandoned bus stops. Alexei wrapped his coat tighter as he walked to the market. His van had not moved in over a month. The battery was dead. The fuel inside the tank had become more valuable than the vehicle itself. Some neighbors had already sold their cars for almost nothing. Others simply left them parked, hoping one day things would return to normal. No one knew if that day would ever come. The town itself had changed. Many stores opened only a few hours a day. Several factories had suspended production because deliveries of raw materials had become unreliable. Workers were sent home with reduced pay. People who had spent their entire lives working suddenly found themselves waiting for supplies, waiting for news, waiting for something to change. Every evening the apartment blocks grew darker. Families switched off unnecessary lights. They burned wood whenever possible to save electricity. Children did homework beside small lamps. The streets emptied shortly after sunset. One morning, a convoy of buses arrived from a neighboring district. The buses were old and crowded. People stepped out carrying backpacks, blankets, and small suitcases. They had come to stay with relatives after local industries closed. The schools were already full. Apartments became crowded. 3 generations often lived under one roof. Despite the hardship, neighbors shared what they had. Someone offered bread, another family shared firewood. A retired teacher organized free lessons for children whose schools had shortened their schedules. Even in difficult times, kindness survived. Alexei met Victor again at the workshop. The old mechanic was repairing a handcart. Not a truck, not a tractor, a simple wooden cart with metal wheels. Victor smiled sadly. Funny, isn't it? What is? I spent 40 years learning to repair engines. He placed the wrench on the table, and now people ask me to fix wagon wheels. Alexei laughed quietly. It was the first genuine laugh he had heard in weeks. That afternoon, another announcement appeared on television. Officials urged citizens to avoid unnecessary travel during the winter months. Transportation restrictions in several regions would remain in place until logistical conditions improved. No dates were given, no explanations followed. After the broadcast ended, the television switched to a documentary about the country's natural beauty: snow-covered forests, frozen rivers, mountains. For a moment, everything looked peaceful. Alexei switched the television off. Outside his window, reality felt very different. Letters began replacing visits. Friends who once drove hundreds of kilometers now communicated through handwritten notes sent whenever postal trucks happened to pass. Some letters arrived after 3 weeks. Others never arrived at all. People learned patience. There was little else they could do. One evening, Elena finally managed to call. The connection was weak, her voice kept cutting out. "We're okay." Static filled the line. "Can you hear me?" "Barely." "They're saying spring might be better." Another burst of interference. "I hope so." The call ended before either of them could say goodbye. Alexei stared at the silent phone for several minutes. He realized that uncertainty had become part of everyday life. Not knowing when supplies would arrive, not knowing when loved ones would call, not knowing what the next announcement would bring. The first heavy snowstorm of the season arrived overnight. By morning, the highway outside town had disappeared beneath a thick blanket of snow. No trucks came, no buses, no cars. Only a lone man walked slowly along the roadside, pulling a sled loaded with bags of food. Alexei watched from a distance. The image stayed with him all day. A country that had once measured progress by speed now moved at the pace of a single person walking through the snow. As darkness settled over the town, another rumor began to spread. People whispered that a major national announcement was coming before the new year. Nobody knew what it would be, but almost everyone felt the same uneasy thought. Whatever happened next, there would be no turning back. Alternative fiction story. The announcement finally came on the last evening of the year. Across the country, televisions interrupted their regular programming. Families gathered around old screens in apartments, village homes, and dormitories. The message was short. Officials declared that temporary transportation controls and resource management measures would continue until further notice. Citizens were urged to remain calm, conserve essential supplies, and support their local communities. There was no timeline, no promise that things would improve soon, only uncertainty. When the broadcast ended, silence filled the room. Alexei switched off the television without saying a word. Outside, fireworks that usually welcomed the new year were nowhere to be seen. The town entered the new year quietly. January was colder than anyone remembered. Snow covered abandoned parking lots, where rows of cars stood frozen in place. Children no longer dreamed about getting their first driver's license. Many wondered if they would ever drive at all. The old world, where highways were always busy and fuel stations always full, already felt distant, as if it belonged to another generation. One morning, Victor knocked on Alexei's door. He carried a folded map, a real paper map. The edges were worn from years of use. "I found this while cleaning the workshop," Victor said. They spread it across the kitchen table. Roads stretched across the enormous country like veins. Some led to cities, others disappeared into forests and mountains. Victor ran his finger across the faded paper. "Funny. What? We used to think these roads connected everyone," he smiled sadly. "Now they remind us how far apart we really are." Weeks passed, people adapted in ways no one had imagined. Communities planted shared gardens, workshops repaired old tools instead of replacing them, teachers held lessons in libraries and community halls, neighbors shared food, firewood and news. Life became slower, harder. But it continued. Alexei realized something unexpected. The greatest shortage had never been gasoline, it had been certainty. People could survive cold winters, they could survive empty roads, they could even survive long lines and difficult days. What they struggled with most was not knowing what tomorrow would bring. One afternoon, the first supply truck in nearly 2 months entered the town. People gathered along the roadside. Some applauded, others simply watched in silence. The truck wasn't carrying enough to solve every problem, but it reminded everyone of something important. Movement had not disappeared completely, neither had hope. That evening, Alexei walked once more to the hill overlooking the highway. The sun was setting behind snow-covered forests. The road was still mostly empty, but this time, far in the distance, 2 headlights appeared. Then another, then a third, small points of light moving slowly toward the horizon. He didn't know where they were going. He didn't know what the future would look like. No one did. The wind carried snow across the pavement as he stood there, hands in his pockets. For months he had believed that the story was about fuel, about empty pumps, about silent roads. Standing there, he understood that it had always been about people, about how ordinary families respond when certainty disappears. Some choose fear, some choose anger, others choose to help the person living next door. History is often remembered through battles, governments and headlines, but everyday life is written by ordinary people who wake up each morning, face uncertainty and continue moving forward anyway. Alexei looked one last time at the distant headlights before turning back toward the town. The road behind him was quiet. The road ahead was unknown. But as long as someone was still walking, still rebuilding, still hoping, the journey was not over.